The wedding ended in laughter, music, and the fading glow of string lights swaying over the rented hall. Guests carried the last of the champagne bottles out to their cars. Elena smiled and waved as her mother pressed a kiss to her cheek, whispering blessings in Spanish before leaving with her cousins. To anyone watching, she was the picture of a radiant new bride. Rosy cheeks, trembling joy, a lace gown fitted too tightly at the waist. But beneath the polished exterior, Elena's stomach twisted. All night she had danced to silence her own thoughts. All night she had avoided the one truth she could not erase. David expected purity, and she could not give it. Narration carried her into the bridal suite at the modest Texas home David had rented on the outskirts of town. The drive there had been filled with his talk of the future. "Our children will be strong," he had said, his hand resting proudly on the steering wheel. She only nodded, her palms damp against her dress. Inside, the house smelled of fresh paint and cologne. David carried her over the threshold with a laugh, kissing her neck as he pushed the door shut. For a moment, she wanted to believe in this new life. She wanted to believe love could bloom despite secrets. He poured 2 glasses of champagne. "To us," he said. She forced a smile. "To us." The glasses clinked. His eyes, pale and sharp, lingered on her as if she were a prize he had finally claimed. Elena's chest tightened. She thought of her mother's warnings, of the whispers among relatives that a husband's honor was fragile, easily shattered. He reached for her hand, pulling her close. "Tonight, Elena, we begin fresh. A life with no shadows." Her throat caught. "No shadows," he said. Yet her past was a shadow that clung to her no matter how she prayed. The lace gown slid to the floor, and the silence thickened. His touch was eager, expectant. Her body, Weaver froze beneath him. She tried to mask it with a smile, but he noticed. "What's wrong?" His voice was low, edged with suspicion. "Nothing," she whispered. But when his hand brushed her cheek, she flinched. A flicker of doubt clouded his expression. "You're nervous?" "Yes, nervous," she said quickly, her heart racing. The minutes stretched. He kissed her, but she stiffened again. The room seemed colder, the shadows heavier. David leaned back, studying her face, searching for an answer unspoken. "Elena," he said, slower this time. "There's something you're not telling me." Her lips parted, but words refused to come. The weight of confession pressed against her chest. She thought of the boy back in Mexico, the one her family had forbidden, the one who had taken what could never be returned. Her secret pulsed like a wound reopening. She began, but the sentence faltered. His jaw tightened. "You're not—" He stopped, narrowing his eyes. A storm brewed in the silence between them. Elena pulled the sheets up to her chin, trembling. She wanted to vanish into the walls, to escape the questions she knew were coming. "Tell me," he demanded, his tone no longer tender but sharp, commanding. Her hands shook as she whispered, "David, please, not tonight." The glass of champagne still fizzed on the bedside table, untouched. His gaze burned into her, dissecting every hesitation. The music of the wedding, the laughter of her family, felt a world away. He leaned closer, his voice cold. "I will know the truth." Her heart thudded like a drum. The secret she carried had not yet spilled, but the air was heavy with its scent, and David was already hunting for it. The night stretched long, filled with unsaid words and unspoken dread. Elena lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to his breathing beside her grow shallow and restless. By dawn, she knew. The wedding night had not united them. It had built a wall of suspicion, and the first crack had already formed. Morning crept through the thin curtains, painting weak stripes of light across the bed. Elena lay rigid, her body tense, her mind replaying every word from the night before. David had not touched her after his questions. He had simply turned his back, leaving her stranded in a silence more punishing than words. When he rose, his movements were sharp, deliberate. He dressed quickly, barely glancing at her. The cheer of the wedding day felt like it belonged to someone else's life. "Elena," he said suddenly, his voice like a blade slicing the quiet. "Tell me the truth." She sat up, clutching the sheet. Her lips trembled. "David, I love you. Please, don't ask me this." He turned, eyes narrowed. "A man knows. Don't treat me like a fool." The room shrank. Her chest ached with the weight of unspoken words. For years she had carried her secret, praying it would be buried by marriage and a new beginning. But now, cornered by his stare, it clawed its way out. I wasn't untouched," she whispered, her voice breaking. Silence. Then, slowly, his jaw tightened, his fists clenched. "You lied," he said. The words dripped with venom. "You gave yourself to another man, and you thought I wouldn't know?" Tears welled in her eyes. "It was before you. Before I knew—" Before she could finish, his hand struck her across the face. The sound cracked through the room, sharp as gunfire. She fell against the headboard, clutching her cheek, stunned not only by the pain, but by the betrayal of the man she had vowed to love. The champagne glass on the table rattled from the force of his movement. "You made me a fool!" David spat, pacing like a caged animal. "Do you know what people would say if they found out? Do you know what you've done to me?" Her voice shook. "I didn't betray you. I chose you. That's what matters now." But he didn't hear her. Rage consumed him. He yanked her from her bed, her bare feet scraping the wooden floor. His hand pressed hard against her arm, leaving red marks in its wake. "You'll learn," he hissed, "that lies have a price." Another blow landed, this time to her ribs. She gasped, her body folding under the weight of pain. The world blurred with tears as she begged, "Please, David, please stop." Yet his fury grew louder than her voice. The walls of the small house echoed with the sounds of impact, thuds, muffled cries, the shattering of trust. Outside, a dog barked. A neighbor paused by her garden, hearing something faint through the window, but quickly looked away. People always looked away. At last, David released her. She crumpled to the floor, her breaths ragged, her face hot with tears and blood rising beneath the skin. He stood above her, chest heaving, his face twisted in disgust rather than remorse. "Clean yourself up," he said coldly. "When you leave this room, you smile. You're my wife now. No one will know." She tried to speak, but her voice cracked, reduced to whispers. "David." "Not another word," he snapped. He stormed out, leaving the door half open. She lay there in silence, the weight of his command pressing down heavier than the blows themselves. Her body throbbed with bruises, but her soul ached worse, stripped of safety, stripped of hope. The champagne glass still fizzed on the bedside table, untouched, mocking the promise of celebration. The scent of his cologne lingered in the air, now tainted with violence. Elena pulled herself up slowly, clutching her side, and caught her reflection in the mirror. A red mark burned across her cheek, her eyes swollen with grief. She dabbed at the tears, whispering to herself, "It was only once. Maybe it will never happen again." But deep down she knew better. The silence of the house felt alive, like walls listening, sealing her fate. Outside, life continued. Cars pass, sing, children playing, while inside, Her home had already become a prison. By evening, she wore long sleeves and painted her lips with color, hiding the truth beneath a mask. When David returned, he acted as though nothing had happened. He ate, he sat in front of the television, he laughed once at a commercial. Elena sat beside him quietly, each movement careful, each word measured, terrified of the storm beneath his calm. The first blow had been struck, and in its echo, a darker truth settled in. This was only the beginning. The days that followed blurred into quiet routines, each one carried on Elena's aching body like hidden weights. She woke before dawn, moving carefully, her ribs sore with every breath. In the bathroom mirror, she painted layers of foundation over the bruise blooming along her cheekbone. Lipstick, too bright for her mood, masked the trembling corners of her mouth. When she tied her hair back, she chose loose strands that would fall across her face. Long sleeves became her armor, even as the Texas heat pressed down mercilessly. "People don't need to know everything," she whispered to herself, practicing a smile in the mirror until it no longer looked broken. David watched her silently each morning. His eyes, cold and unblinking, lingered on her face as though searching for cracks in the mask. He said little, but the weight of his suspicion filled every room. At breakfast one morning, his fork scraped against the plate as he spoke. "Your family will visit soon. You'll act normal. Do you understand?" Elena nodded quickly. "Of course." "Good." He didn't look at her again. Narration threaded through her days like a quiet confession. She told herself it had been only one night of violence, that it would never happen again. Men lost their temper, didn't they? It was stress, nerves, pride. If she loved him enough, perhaps he would soften. But each night, when he returned from work, she saw it in his eyes. The storm had not passed. His silence weighed heavier than shouting, his glances sharper than any slap. He would study Hates, air as if searching for proof she still belonged to him, proof she had not lied again. The neighbors noticed her long sleeves, her quietness. At the grocery store, Mrs. Green tilted her head and asked kindly, "Are you feeling all right, dear? You look pale." Elena smiled, clutching her basket. "Just tired, adjusting to married life." The lie slid out smoothly, but her stomach churned as she said it. She was becoming skilled at deception, not to hide infidelity, but to hide survival. Nights were the hardest. She would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to David's shallow breaths beside her. Sometimes she heard the creak of the floor as he rose in the dark, pacing the hallway, his thoughts unknown. Each time he returned to bed, she froze, uncertain if his touch would be tender or cruel. One evening he broke the silence. "Do you ever think of him?" His voice was low, but the words struck her like another blow. Her throat tightened. "No, I don't. You're lying." "I'm not," she whispered, her hands trembling beneath the table. He leaned closer, his face inches from hers. "I can see it in your eyes." Elena's chest caved with fear, but she forced her voice steady. "David, you are my husband. My life is with you." For a moment, he said nothing. Then he leaned back, but the suspicion in his gaze remained. The following morning, Elena found herself pressing extra powder onto her skin, though no fresh bruise had bloomed. The makeup was no longer just a disguise. It was a ritual, a shield. Days stretched into weeks, each one heavy with silence. The house that should have been a place of joy now felt like a stage where she performed obedience, where every word and gesture was calculated to avoid anger. Yet hope flickered stubbornly inside her. Maybe he will forget. Maybe time will heal this. But as she watched David at dinner one night, his fork stabbing into his feet, food with unnecessary force, his eyes locked on her as if measuring her soul, she realized something chilling. The violence had not ended with bruises. It had seeped into the air, into the silence, into every heartbeat of their marriage. The bruises on her skin would fade, but the ones in her mind grew darker, deeper, harder to hide. And in the shadows of his quiet suspicion, she sensed control tightening around her like an invisible chain. Elena waited until David left for work, the sound of his truck fading down the long Texas road. The silence that followed felt heavy, suffocating, but it was also the only safety she had. She closed the curtains, locked the bedroom door, and pressed her trembling hands to the phone. For days, she had carried the weight of her secret bruises, her hollow smiles, her quiet obedience. But the loneliness pressed harder than the pain. She needed someone who knew her before all of this. Her finger hovered over the numbers. She hadn't dialed Mexico in months. When Marisol's voice finally came through, warm and familiar, Elena's chest cracked open. Elena, Dios mío, it's been so long. Are you happy? How is married life? The words struck like knives. Elena's throat tightened. She wanted to pour everything out, to scream the truth across the border. Instead, her voice came out small, shaking. I'm fine, Mari. Just adjusting. Marisol laughed softly. Adjusting? That doesn't sound like the Elena I know. Tell me, what's wrong? Tears welled, but Elena pressed a hand over her mouth, lowering her voice to a whisper. It's difficult. He's not who I thought he was. What do you mean? Elena hesitated, staring at the bruises fading across her arm. The words sat on her tongue like stones. To confess would mean shame, disgrace. Her family had celebrated this marriage, had trusted her choice. What would they say if they knew? She whispered only fragments. He's angry. Sometimes rough. I don't know how to make him happy. Marisol's tone shifted, concerned. Elena, listen to me. If he hurts you... No! Elena cut her off quickly, panic rising. No, it's not like that. I'm just nervous. Maybe it's my fault. There was silence on the other end. Then Marisol sighed. It's never your fault to be hurt, amiga. Never. Promise me you'll be careful. Elena closed her eyes, whispering, I promise. But even as she spoke, fear gnawed at her. What if David ever found out she had called? He hated secrets, hated the idea of anyone else knowing their private life. She ended the call quickly, pressing the phone to her chest as though she could hide the conversation in her heartbeat. What she didn't know, what made her blood run cold minutes later, was that David's truck had returned. The front door creaked open. Heavy footsteps moved across the hall. Elena froze, phone still in her hand. Elena? His voice carried through the house, sharp and suspicious. She scrambled, hiding the phone beneath the pillow, wiping her tears with the back of her sleeve. Yes, I'm here. He appeared in the doorway, eyes narrowing. Who were you talking to? Her breath caught. No one. Just checking messages. He stepped closer, gaze locked on her trembling hands. I heard your voice. You were whispering. I was just praying, she stammered. His silence was worse than shouting. He studied her face with that same cold suspicion, the kind that burned deeper than any bruise. Then he gave a short nod, though his eyes betrayed him. He didn't believe her. All right, he said slowly. But remember, Elena, I don't like secrets. He turned and left the room, but his footsteps were heavier now, his presence darker. She collapsed onto the bed, clutching the pillow where the phone lay hidden. Her pulse thundered in her ears. That night, David was quiet at dinner. Too quiet. He asked no questions, made no accusations, but every glance he gave her was laced with unspoken judgment. Ellen ate mechanically, her mind spinning. She had spoken only fragments to Marisol, yet somehow David seemed to know. The walls of the house closed tighter, and the silence grew sharper. For the first time, Elena realized the danger was no longer only in his fists. It lived in his suspicion, his watchful eyes, his control. The bruises on her skin would heal. But his paranoia, his need to know every thought, every whisper, would cut deeper until there was no place left to hide. David's suspicion lingered like smoke in the air, choking every corner of the house. After the whispered phone call, his eyes followed Elena with sharper intent. He said little, but his silence was weighted, heavy enough to make her stumble over the smallest gestures: how long she washed dishes, how often she left the room, how she touched her own hair. Elena felt herself unraveling, piece by piece. Nights became a battlefield of shallow sleep and endless dread. And in that sleeplessness, memories stirred. Memories she had buried beneath layers of denial. Mexico. The dusty streets of her hometown. The boy she once loved. His name had been Gabriel. She could still see him. Dark eyes that laughed even when he didn't. Hands calloused from work in his father's shop. Promises whispered in the summer heat. They had been young, reckless, swept away by a love her family had warned her against. He was poor, from a family with no status, no land. Her mother had said, "A girl's worth is her purity, Elena. Do not throw it away on a boy who cannot provide." "Ah, Mani." But passion ignored caution. Their love had blossomed in hidden corners, beneath stars that burned brighter than the lanterns of the town square. One night, secrecy gave way to surrender. She had given herself to him fully, believing foolishly in forever. Forever, however, was stolen. Her father had caught them, rage tearing through the family. Gabriel had been sent away, beaten and shamed, while Elena was locked inside her room for weeks. The whispers followed her everywhere. The foolish girl, the ruined girl. She thought she had escaped Alway, full of it when she married David. But now, the past clawed its way back, unrelenting. David noticed her restlessness. One evening, as they sat at the table, he leaned forward, his fork clinking against the plate. "You've been hiding something," he said quietly, his voice colder than winter steel. "Who was he?" Her pulse raced. "What do you mean?" "You know what I mean." His gaze pinned her. "The man before me. The one who touched you." The room blurred at the edges. Elena wanted to deny it, to lie again, but the weight of truth pressed too heavily against her chest. Her voice cracked, fragile as glass. "His name was Gabriel." David's jaw clenched. The name seemed to infect him instantly, like poison in his veins. He leaned back slowly, but the fury in his eyes betrayed his calm tone. "Tell me everything." She lowered her gaze to the table, words trembling out. "We were young. It was before you, before I knew anything of life. My family, they forced me to leave him. I thought marriage would erase it. I thought you'd never have to know." He rose from his chair, pacing, his fists curling at his sides. "Erase it. Do you think a man forgets that his wife gave herself to another first?" Tears streaked down her face. "It wasn't betrayal. It was love. Foolish, innocent love." "Love?" His voice thundered, striking her harder than any blow. "You speak of love for another man in my house, my bed?" She flinched, pressing her hands together in pleading. "David, please. It was years ago. It means nothing now. You are my husband." But her words slid off him like rain against stone. His face twisted, not only with rage but with something darker, possession, pride wounded beyond repair. He stopped pacing, standing over her, his shadow stretching across the table. "I will never forgive you for this," he whispered. Her sobs filled the silence, but his stare was unyielding. She realized then that confessing had not freed her. It had chained her tighter, fueling his paranoia with every detail she revealed. That night, when she lay in bed beside him, he did not touch her. He did not speak. His breathing was steady, controlled, but she could feel the storm building beneath it. In her mind, Gabriel's face flickered, soft, tender, a ghost from another life. But in her reality, David's shadow grew darker, more suffocating. The forbidden love she once clung to had become the weapon David would wield against her, again and again. And as she closed her eyes, trembling, she knew. The real punishment had only begun. The morning after her confession, David's silence became a new form of punishment. He no longer raised his hand, no longer shouted, but his every decision reshaped her world. Elena felt the shift immediately, her freedom shrinking inch by inch, like a noose tightening. It began with the phone. One evening, she reached for it, only to find it missing. "Where is it?" she asked softly. David didn't look up from the television. "I'll keep it. Too many temptations in that little device. You don't need it." Her stomach sank. "But my family—" "You'll see them when I say so." His tone left no room for argument. Days later, when she asked about visiting the grocery store alone, he shook his head. "No. You'll wait until I come home. A wife belongs with her husband, not wandering where eyes don't belong." Her protests died in her throat. Each time she tried to speak, he twisted her words. "Why do you resist me, Elena? If you were truly devoted, you wouldn't need anyone else." Narration revealed the cruel genius of his control. He didn't just confine her body, he worked at her mind. He reminded her daily of her past mistake, the sin of Gabriel. "If you were pure," he whispered one night, his arm heavy across her chest, "maybe I'd trust you. But you've already proven what you are." Those words burrowed deep, eroding her strength. She began to believe him, at least in the quietest corners of her mind. Maybe I am broken. Maybe I don't deserve it. Better. The walls of the Texas home became her prison. Curtains stayed drawn, the phone locked away, letters from Mexico unanswered. When neighbors knocked to invite her for coffee, David answered the door himself, smiling politely, saying Elena was resting. She never heard about it until afterward, when he said, "They don't need to see you. They don't deserve to." At night, the gaslighting grew sharper. "You imagine things," he told her when she recalled his blows. "I never touched you. You bruise so easily like a child. Stop exaggerating." "But—" she began once. His voice cut her short. "Are you calling me a liar?" She shook her head quickly, shame burning her skin. The more he spoke, the more she doubted herself. The mirror reflected her hollow eyes, her painted smile, but inside, she could no longer tell where truth ended and manipulation began. One evening, she dared to ask for money, just a few bills to buy small things for the house. David's expression hardened. "Money? For what? To call him again? To plan your escape?" "No, David, I only—" His hand slammed the table. "You'll get what you need when I decide. Nothing more." She recoiled, nodding quickly, the request dying on her lips. Narration pressed into her despair. Her world had collapsed into four walls and his watchful eyes. Even her thoughts felt unsafe. The sound of his footsteps in the hallway sent chills down her spine, as if her mind itself were being policed. And yet, somewhere in the deepest part of her, a voice resisted. This isn't love. This isn't life. But each time it rose, David's words crushed it. "You're lucky I took you," he told her often. "A ruined woman like you. Who else would want you?" She believed him, even as her soul screamed otherwise. By the end of that week, Elena no longer reached for the phone, no longer asked about leaving the house. She sat quietly, knitting small things with trembling fingers, waiting for his return, waiting for approval that never came. The house was silent, but in that silence, she felt herself disappearing. Piece by piece, day by day, she was becoming exactly what David wanted: alone, obedient, and broken. Summer settled heavy over the Texas town, the air thick with heat and the buzzing of cicadas. Elena still wore long sleeves. She told herself it was habit, but the truth was darker. Bruises patterned her arms like fading shadows. Neighbors noticed. They always noticed. At the corner store, Mrs. Green's eyes lingered too long on the purple bloom near Elena's wrist. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Rough day, honey?" Elena forced a smile, adjusting the sleeve quickly. "Just clumsy. Burned myself cooking." Mrs. Green nodded, pretending to accept it, though her mouth pressed tight. When Elena walked away, she felt the weight of whispers ripple behind her. In the quiet streets, curtains shifted. People saw her move slower, shoulders hunched, her once bright laughter replaced by silence. Some whispered to each other, "She doesn't look happy." But no one knocked on her door. Narration turned inward. Elena began to understand that silence was its own cruelty. It wasn't only David who trapped her. It was the unspoken agreement of a community that turned its face away. One evening, she stepped outside to water the small patch of flowers by the porch. Mr. Taylor, their neighbor across the street, waved stiffly. His eyes darted to the bruise under her eye, half hidden by powder. His smile faltered, but he said nothing. He simply returned to his lawn, trimming grass in deliberate lines. Later that night, David noticed her lingering outside. "Enjoying the attention?" His tone was laced with venom. "No," Elena whispered. "I just needed air." "Don't give them reasons to talk," he warned, gripping her chin hard enough to leave fresh marks. The next morning, she heard two women whispering outside the church. "It's obvious," one said. "Maybe, but it's not our place," the other replied. Their words sank into Elena's bones. Not our place. She wanted to scream. If not yours, then whose? But she remained silent, as trapped by shame as they were by fear of meddling. Each ignored bruise chipped away at her hope. She had dreamed in secret that maybe someone would intervene, that a hand would reach out, that kindness could slip through the cracks of her prison. Instead, she learned the truth. Silence protected him, not her. In the evenings, when David's truck returned, she stood at the window watching the neighbors water their lawns, children playing in the streets. Normal life unfolded just steps away, yet she was invisible inside her own home. Sometimes, when the arguments grew loud enough, when his voice thundered and her cries broke free, she was certain they could hear. The walls were thin, the windows open, but no one knocked. No one came. Elena began to lose hope of escape. Even if she ran, where would she go? To family who had celebrated her marriage? To neighbors who refused to see? One night, after David had fallen asleep, she sat in the darkened living room, hugging her knees. Through the window she saw the glow of porch lights, the silhouettes of neighbors chatting on stoops. They laughed easily, as if cruelty did not exist in their quiet street. Her own silence pressed against her throat, suffocating. She thought of calling out, of breaking through the wall of indifference. But the words never came. She feared they would only echo back unanswered. The neighbor's silence was louder than David's blows. And in that silence, Elena felt herself slipping further into despair, the possibility of freedom fading like the last light on the horizon. The silence of the neighborhood clung to Elena like a second skin. She had stopped waiting for someone to intervene, stopped hoping for sympathetic eyes. But when the next storm of violence came, it struck harder than ever before. It was late on a Sunday night. The air inside the house was heavy with the smell of whiskey. David's footsteps were uneven, his voice sharp with irritation. He had been brooding for days, suspicion burning in his eyes every time Elena spoke too softly or lingered too long by the window. "Who were you smiling at?" he demanded, slamming his glass on the counter. "No one," she said quickly. "I wasn't—" "Don't lie to me!" His shout shook her to the core. Narration carried the weight. Elena's body tensed, bracing for the blow she knew was coming. It wasn't just the pain she feared, it was the humiliation, the reminder that she was nothing more than a possession in his eyes. This time, though, something inside her broke. David's hand cracked across her face, and before she could think, Elena grabbed the nearest object, a ceramic lamp on the side table. She swung it wildly. The sound of glass shattering against his shoulder echoed through the room. David staggered back, eyes wide, clutching his arm where blood trickled from a cut. For the first time, he looked shocked. "You little bitch," he hissed, voice low and dangerous. Elena's chest heaved, heart pounding so loud she thought the neighbors must hear. But of course, no one came. "I didn't mean," she stammered, the lamp base still in her trembling hands. David stepped forward, rage twisting his face. "You'll regret that!" For a split second, Elena considered running. Her gaze flicked to the door, to the darkness of the street beyond. Freedom was only a few steps away. But fear rooted her in place. What if he caught her before she made it? What if the neighbors, who already turned blind eyes pus, he'd her back toward him? Her mind spun with darker fears, her family in Mexico. They had pressured her into this marriage, celebrated the union. How could she return and confess the truth? That she was not the obedient wife they expected, that she had failed at keeping peace, that she had married her abuser. The weight of shame pressed as heavy as David's threats. David pressed a hand to his bleeding shoulder, his smile cold. "You think you can hurt me and walk away? You belong here, with me. Don't forget that." Elena lowered the broken lamp base, tears blurring her vision. She whispered, more to herself than to him, "I just wanted it to stop." But she knew it wouldn't stop. Not now. Her small act of resistance had only fed his fury. She had crossed an invisible line and there was no going back. Narration slowed, heavy. That night, as David finally disappeared into the bedroom, slamming the door behind him, Elena sat alone in the living room, knees drawn to her chest. Her hands shook uncontrollably, still feeling the weight of the lamp, the sound of breaking glass ringing in her ears. For the first time, she realized she was capable of fighting back. For the first time, she realized how close she was to losing everything. The house was silent again, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the silence before a storm. Charged, dangerous, inevitable. And as Elena stared at the front door, torn between escape and despair, she knew that the breaking point had come. What followed would change everything. The storm broke only days after the lamp incident. David's wound had scabbed over, but his fury had not. He drank more heavily, prowling the house like a predator. Elena moved quietly, shrinking into corners, every step calculated to avoid his attention. But the silence she had lived with finally shattered on a Wednesday night. David came home in a rage, convinced she had been staring too long at the mailman earlier that day. His accusations spiraled into shouts, fists slamming against the walls. Elena begged him to stop, her cries raw and desperate. Then came the blow that sent her crumpling against the coffee table. A scream tore from her throat, louder than ever before, sharp enough to cut through the humid Texas night. For the first time, the neighbors could not ignore it. Curtains twitched, lights flicked on across the street. And somewhere in the darkness, someone finally dialed 911. Minutes later, red and blue lights flashed outside the house. David's face paled at the sight, his rage momentarily stunned into silence. 2 officers stepped inside, their radios crackling. Elena stood trembling, blood at the corner of her lip, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. David loomed nearby, his voice suddenly calm, practiced. "She's overreacting," he told them smoothly. "She fell. Clumsy, like always." The taller officer turned to Elena. "Ma'am, do you need medical attention?" Her lips parted, but fear froze the words. She saw David's eyes, cold, warning. Still, something inside her pushed past the terror. "Yes," she whispered. "He hit me." The words hung in the air, fragile but unshakable. David's jaw clenched. The officers exchanged a glance. One began jotting notes while the other guided Elena to a chair. They asked routine questions, her name, his name, how long they'd been married, what happened tonight. Each answer felt like stripping her soul bare, exposing her shame to strangers who would pack it neatly into paperwork. When she faltered, the officer pressed gently. "Do you want to file a report?" Her voice shook. "Yes." For a moment, Elena believed this could be the beginning of freedom. But as the pen scratched across the page, she realized how detached their eyes were. Professional, distant, as if her suffering were just another line in a long night's work. The officer handed her a carbon copy of the report, the paper thin and impersonal. "You'll be contacted," he said. "If you need shelter, we can give you a number." A number. A phone call. Nothing immediate, nothing that promised safety tonight. Meanwhile, David stood only feet away, silent, watching her with eyes that promised hell once the uniforms left. When the officers finally did leave, their car rolling down the street, the house fell into suffocating quiet. Elena clutched the paper in her hands, as if it could shield her. It didn't. David stepped closer, his voice low, venomous. "You think this piece of paper will save you? You humiliated me. You made me look weak." His hand brushed the wound on his shoulder from the lamp. His smile was chilling. "Now it's war." Elena's heart pounded. Filing the report had not freed her. It had branded her. She had broken their secret wide open, and now she stood exposed, unprotected. Narration deepened. That night, she lay awake in bed, the copy of the police report hidden under her pillow. It crinkled with every movement, a fragile reminder of her attempt to fight back. But David's steady breathing beside her felt like a countdown. She understood with terrifying clarity that the danger had only escalated. Filing the report had not ended her nightmare. It had only sharpened it. Days after the police report, Elena lived as though walking across shattered glass, every step delicate, every breath shallow. David's rage simmered, quieter now but more dangerous, like a storm gathering in silence. She avoided his eyes, cooked his meals, moved through the house like a shadow. The paper copy of the report remained hidden under her mattress, a fragile token of courage she barely believed in anymore. Then, without warning, her past appeared at the door. It was a Saturday afternoon when Elena opened it to find her mother, Rosario, standing on the porch. The older woman's face was etched with worry, her eyes red-rimmed from sleepless travel. In her hands she clutched a worn leather purse, the same one she had carried when Elena left Mexico as a bride. "Elena," Rosario whispered, her voice trembling. For a moment, Elena couldn't breathe. The sight of her mother, thousands of miles from home, broke the wall of silence she had built around herself. Tears rose before she could stop them. "Mama, what are you doing here?" "I heard," Rosario said, stepping inside quickly, glancing around as if David might appear at any second. "Rumors. Family whispers. I had to see you with my own eyes." Narration slowed, heavy. Elena felt the years collapse between them. She had wanted to hide the truth, to keep her mother's image of her intact. But Rosario's eyes searched her face, and the bruises that makeup could not conceal told their own story.
Elena,
her mother breathed, cupping her daughter's cheek.
Dios mío.
Tears spilled freely now.
What has he done to you?
The dam inside Elena cracked. She collapsed into her mother's arms, sobbing. The truth came in fragments, broken words, whispered confessions, nights of violence, isolation, fear, the lamp, the police report. Rosario held her, rocking gently, her own tears mixing with Elena's.
You cannot stay here,
she eyed firmly. We will go back. Tonight, if we must. Elena shook her head, trembling.
I can't, Mama. You don't understand. They'll blame me. The family, the church. They'll say I failed him, that I failed you.
Her mother's grip tightened.
Failed? No, he failed you. He dishonored this marriage, not you. You are my daughter. That is what matters.
But Elena's voice was haunted.
If I leave, I'll be the shame of the family, a divorced woman, a broken bride. They'll whisper forever.
Rosario's tears flowed harder, her voice both fierce and pleading.
Better whispers than your grave. Better shame than silence.
The living room filled with the weight of generations, of cultural expectations pressing like chains. Elena's grandmother's words echoed in her memory. A wife must endure. A wife must sacrifice. The voices of a culture that measured worth in obedience and survival. Yet here was her mother, breaking those chains with every tear, every word.
Elena,
Rosario whispered, stroking her hair.
Your life is more precious than tradition, more precious than appearances. Please, Hija, listen to me.
The front door creaked suddenly, and Elena froze. David's truck had pulled into the driveway. His heavy footsteps sounded on the porch. Elena's heart thundered. Panic surged through her veins. She gripped her mother's hand, eyes wide with fear.
Please,
she begged in a whisper.
Don't say anything. He can't know you're here for this.
Rosario's face hardened, wiping her tears quickly. She understood the stakes. As David entered, his eyes flicked between the two women, suspicion already burning. Didn't expect company, he muttered, forcing a smile that never reached his eyes. Elena stood frozen, caught between her mother's quiet strength and her husband's looming presence. Her mother's tears had opened the possibility of escape, but also the certainty of greater danger. And, as the silence thickened in the room, Elena realized that choices could no longer be delayed. The time to decide was closing in. The days after Rosario's arrival passed in fragile quiet. David's suspicion sharpened, his watchfulness constant. He hovered around the house, muttering under his breath, drinking late into the night. Elena knew her mother's presence unsettled him, though he wore a mask of politeness when Rosario was near. But behind closed doors, his voice was sharper than ever.
Don't think she'll save you, he warned. You're mine. Always.
Rosario's pleading eyes said otherwise. Late at night, when David's snores rumbled through the house, mother and daughter whispered at the kitchen table.
You must go, Rosario urged. Marisol will help. She's ready.
Elena's childhood friend had already arranged a plan. A car waiting at the edge of town, cash hidden in a handbag Rosario had smuggled from Mexico, and a safe place to hide until they could decide the next step. Fear coiled in Elena's stomach, but resolve slowly bloomed. She could no longer ignore her mother's words, or the bruises that never seemed to fade. The night of the escape came wrapped in thick summer heat. The cicadas outside screeched as if warning of the storm to come. Rosario packed quietly, folding a few clothes into a bag. Elena tucked the police report into the pocket of her dress, a fragile shield of proof. Her hands trembled as she slipped on her shoes.
Are you ready?
Rosario whispered. Elena nodded, though her body shook. Every step toward the door felt like stepping toward both freedom and destruction. They crept through the darkened living room. The front door was only feet away. The car keys glinted in Rosario's hand. Elena's pulse hammered in her ears, and then the floorboard creaked. A shadow shifted in the hallway. David's voice cut through the darkness, low and venomous. "Going somewhere?" Elena froze, her body stiff with terror. David stepped forward, his face half lit by the glow of the porch light. Tea. His eyes blazed with fury, his hand gripping the doorway like a trap ready to spring. "You thought you could run?" His voice rose, echoing through the house. "David, please!" Elena's voice cracked. He lunged, grabbing her wrist, twisting it hard enough to draw a cry of pain. The bag dropped to the floor, spilling clothes across the tiles. Rosario stepped forward, desperation in her eyes. "Let her go!" she cried, striking at him with trembling hands. David shoved her aside, his focus locked on Elena. "You're not leaving me. Not alive." Something inside Elena snapped. She had spent months silenced, caged, terrified. But now, with her mother gasping on the floor, with freedom just beyond the door, she found her voice. "No," she whispered, then louder. "No more." She kicked hard, her foot connecting with his knee. He stumbled, cursing. Seizing the moment, Elena grabbed the lamp from the side table. The second time a lamp became her weapon, and swung it against his shoulder. The sound of impact rang out. David roared, but his grip faltered. Elena tore free, her breath ragged. "Run!" Rosario shouted. Elena snatched the keys, yanking open the door. The humid night air rushed against her face like a promise. Behind her, David staggered forward, blood at his temple, fury twisting his expression. "You'll regret this!" he screamed, voice cracking with rage. But Elena didn't look back. She dragged her mother with her, sprinting across the porch, fumbling with the keys until the car lights flared. Her heart thundered as she slid into the driver's seat, hands slick with sweat. The engine roared to life. Gravel crunched beneath the tires as she sped down the darkened street. David's shouts fading into the night. Narration slowed, heavy with finality. Elena's body ached, her face bruised, her wrists sore. Yet, as the house shrank in the rearview mirror, she felt something she had almost forgotten. Hope. She had broken free. Not unscarred, not unafraid, but free. The night swallowed her car, carrying her toward a future uncertain but her own. The first weeks after the escape blurred together, nights in a women's shelter, whispered conversations with lawyers, cautious phone calls to Marisol for guidance. Elena lived in constant tension, flinching at every sound, afraid David might appear at any moment. Yet each dawn that arrived without his shadow at the door was a small victory. David was arrested a month later, after Rosario's testimony and Elena's police report gave weight to the case. The bruises documented by photographs, the neighbors' reluctant statements about screams in the night, and the broken lamp that still bore his blood, all became evidence. For once, silence turned into words on paper, words that could not be denied. In the courtroom, Elena sat stiffly in the witness chair, her palms damp. David's eyes bored into her, dark with venom, as if the trial itself was her betrayal. "You ruined me," he spat one afternoon during recess, escorted away by deputies. Elena did not answer. She had no need. The truth was speaking for her now. The trial stretched for weeks, each day reopening wounds. Lawyers dissected her life, questioning her choices, her past, even her virginity, as if the intimacy of her body were evidence against her. The shame pressed heavily, but this time she did not bow beneath it. Her mother's voice echoed in her heart. "Better whispers than your grave." At last, the verdict came. Guilty. David was sentenced to years behind bars, his control finally broken by iron bars instead of locked doors. But victory carried its own cost. Narration deepened. Freedom was not clean. not without scars. Elena carried them on her skin, faint bruises that faded into pale marks, and within her mind, where memories replayed like broken film. Even laughter felt foreign at first, a sound she had to relearn. Rebuilding her life was slow. She rented a small apartment near the edge of town, far from the house that had been her prison. She worked part-time at a bakery, the smell of fresh bread soothing where fear once lived. Marisol visited often, her friendship a lifeline. Rosario remained by her side longer than planned, unwilling to leave her daughter until she stood steadier on her own feet. Sometimes, in the quiet of night, Elena still woke shaking, convinced she heard David's footsteps. But instead of silence pressing against her throat, she whispered to herself, firm and steady, "You are free." Narration turned reflective. Elena had learned the true cost of silence. It wasn't only the bruises, the broken bones, or the near-death nights. It was the complicity of neighbors who looked away, the weight of traditions that demanded endurance instead of protection, the shame that bound her tongue until it nearly killed her. But she had also learned the power of a single voice. The moment she whispered, "He hit me," to the officers, the moment she told her mother the truth, the moment she refused to bow beneath David's grip, her voice had saved her. Elena walked through life with scars, yes, but not as a victim, as a survivor who had reclaimed her story. And in her quiet strength, there was a warning for others. Silence protects the abuser, not the abused. Her final reflection carried like a prayer, fragile but unshakable. Better whispers than graves. Better truth than silence.